It is not something that should have ever made it past the editor. And that tells us something important. If they're publishing something that if the circumstances were different, if it wasn't Mexico, if it wasn't López Obrador, a counter-hegemonic, anti-imperialist leader, they wouldn't be publishing these kinds of stories. What it is a smear campaign. But you did an excellent job breaking it down. I'm hoping that together we can walk through this thread that you prepared, exactly pointing out what is wrong with this article. It's not just that it shouldn't have made it past an editor's page, but there's a lot of, I would say, journalistic malpractice going on.
So yeah, let's just set this up. This is really Act 3 here that we've been covering since the beginning of this podcast. Act 1 was the Baker Institute and its Mexico report of 2024, alleging with no proof whatsoever that Morena and the cartels could be in collusion in this year's elections, right? Tony Payan, the Texas Observer, etc. Act 2 was the coordinated hit by ProPublica, Deutsche Welle, and Inside Crime, which tried to rehash a closed investigation that went nowhere regarding the 2006 campaign. Now, just a week later, a couple weeks later, we've got the New York Times coming out with something equally unsubstantiated about the 2018 campaign, right? You know, I'm a writer, and I'm a playwright, so all of these plays have a 3-act structure, even farces like these. So now we're in Act 3, right? And they've covered the bases of all of AMLO's presidential runs with an equal lack of substance. So let's go into that, right? As I put here at the beginning of my thread, the latest in a series of clockwork election-timed hits against AMLO, this time by Alan Foyer and Natalie Kittereff at the New York Times, is the biggest nothing burger yet. And that's really saying something considering the first 2 nothing burgers. So you've got like a double extra cheese nothing burger, right? With
nothing
extra
burger,
bacon.
Nothing burger.
That's a nothing
and maybe
burger.
For our bilingual guests, it basically, when we say it's a nothing burger, it's quite literally 2 halves of bread. There's nothing in between there. There's no substance. That's what we mean by nothing burger. It's the perfect term for this.
So the piece begins with the vaguest of the vague, right? Even from the title, it said, you know, American agencies had investigated allegations, this, that, other thing. And so what it says here at the beginning is, American law enforcement officials who spent years looking into allegations set out by U.S. records, which U.S. records, and this is what Alvaro Delgado points out, 3 people familiar with the matter. Again, who? Natalie Kittereff's aunt? Alan Foyer's mom? George Tenet? Who are we talking about here? Who are the 3 people familiar with the matter, right? I've got 3 friends who consider themselves to be familiar with Mexican politics. We're not necessarily going to invite them on the program, right? Who are people familiar with the matter, right? And this sets the tone for the whole piece. You think, okay, it's just an introductory paragraph. Maybe they'll get more specific as they go along. But they don't, right? Next up, they talk about a lot of kind of, pardon the phrase, kind of ass-covering terms like potential links and possible ties, right, without any direct connections. Actually, what it says is, but while the recent efforts by U.S. officials identified possible ties between the cartels and Mr. López Obrador's associates, they did not find any direct connection between the president himself and criminal organizations. Okay, so we've got records, we've got 3 unnamed people, we've got possible ties, we've got potential links, right? As if that's not enough of a vague soup, right? Let's get to the next in the thread, where they really make it even worse. They say, and I think they're aware that the ProPublica piece was based on the quintessential unreliable witness, who's Roberto López Nájera, right, who we explained in detail. We don't have to go into it again. ProPublica really mentioned him all the way to the end of their piece, only to try to recuperate his shot reputation, because without him, their piece falls apart. So what the Times says next is, much of the information collected by U.S. officials came from informants whose accounts can be difficult to corroborate and sometimes end up being incorrect. The investigators obtained the information while looking into the activities of drug cartels, and it was not clear how much of what the informants told them was independently confirmed. Well, gee, Natalie and Alan, isn't that your job? Isn't that your job to independently confirm these allegations before you print something? Rather than just say that you heard something that was not independently confirmed from sources who have proven to be unreliable by your own reckoning. Isn't it your job then to do that confirmation? To do that legwork? To connect those dots? Apparently not.
That's the part that's
Apparently
most
not.
grating to me. Is that, journalism it's a hard work. It means, there's a term that we use in journalism. It's called shoe leather journalism. And it's said that because you have to wear out the leather of your shoes going out there and corroborating the tips that you may get. You don't just go out there and repeat the falsehoods that are being fed to you by interested parties, which is exactly what's going on here. Right? They're riding on the reputation of the Times as an outlet that it no longer deserves. We should be clear about that. I read an interesting thread earlier today about how, they used to be called the Lady in Gray and had a stellar reputation, Watergate, and working with other organizations to expose this or that, corruption at high levels in the government, et cetera, et cetera. That reputation is no longer, I think, credible in today's day and age. And so you actually you can't just ride on that. You can't just say, well, I was fed this information, and so now I'm going to reproduce it on the pages of the New York Times, of taking advantage of that prestige that it still somewhat has in certain circles, right? In fact, what you did was journalistic malpractice. If this had been any other world leader, other than the ones that are demonized, then you wouldn't have seen this kind of publication actually make it to print. They didn't
That's
do their
absolutely
job.
right, José Luis. Yep. And it's just what you said. They're trying to trade on their reputation and their prior prestige to basically just say, believe us. You have to believe us because we're not going to give you anything else. And we're just going to go into a little bit later another article by Natalie to give you just more reason why you shouldn't believe her or them. Right? But that's exactly what they're trying to trade off. Believe us because there's nothing there. Let's go on here. The feast of vagueness goes on, right? In this next long paragraph, it talks about records show, right, that the investigators were told by an informant that one of AMLO's confidants met with Ismael Zambada Garcia from the Sinaloa cartel. Okay, so we've got like 2 degrees of vagueness. Records show that investigators were told by. The New York Times is famous for abusing the passive voice, right? As we've seen, for example, in its recent Palestine coverage. But this is kind of taking it again to an extreme. The next paragraph, a different source told them that after the election, 2 of AMLO's allies, were they actually in the campaign? What does that mean? What does allies mean? Received money from the Zetas, right? Or offered money from the Zetas. Then it says investigators obtained information from a third source. This maybe was Natalie's aunt, or we don't know. Suggesting that the cartels were in possession of videos, and I'm going to get to this in a minute, of the president's sons picking up drug money. And then it gets to the end point. It's saying U.S. law enforcement officers also independently tracked payments from people they believed to be cartel operatives. What? It's like they didn't even do the basic job of confirming that they were cartel operatives? That blows the whole thing up. Right there. They believed to be cartel operatives? You've got to do that before you do anything else. Because nothing else in the chain works if you haven't established that the people you believe to be cartel operatives actually are.
I mean, this isn't a mom and pop operation. This is the U.S. government nearly limitless resources at this disposal. If they wanted to figure it out, if they were actual cartel operatives, they would assign the people necessary to figure that out and confirm it before proceeding. Which also, brings us to the point. They didn't proceed for a reason. There's a reason why this investigation got frozen at this stage, because there's nothing there.
So let's continue. Then comes the sleazy insinuation, which was included in Kitareff's letter to AMLO, which we should mention. Kitareff sent a letter to AMLO's spokesperson, Jesus Ramirez, the classic kind of gun to your head, answer us by 5 o'clock or else, Mr. President, which just shows this overweening arrogance of U.S. legacy media, right? We're giving you 12 hours, and we want an answer. Because if you don't, we got stuff on your kids, right? So fork over the information that they don't have, trying to see if AMLO will complete the investigation for them by panicking, oh no, it's the New York Times, and maybe slipping and giving them something that they could then use, right? You got until 5 o'clock, Mr. President. That's the way that went down.
They
Right.
should have watched that interview he did with Ina, because he does not have a high opinion of the New York Times. They would have quickly found out that those kind of mafia-like threats don't work on López Obrador.
So the sleazy insinuation is that AMLO traveled to Sinaloa in 2020 for the express purpose of meeting El Chapo's mother. He was there to inaugurate an infrastructure project. El Chapo's mother was there. He shook her hand, and this has become a right-wing talking point ever since then. Very sleazily, they pick up on that to try to suggest in the letter that AMLO went there precisely for that person, a kind of an attempt to create a guilt by association situation. In the text, though, they're more careful because they know there's nothing there either. So at least one of these payments, they said, was made around the same time, that Mr. López Obrador traveled to the state of Sinaloa in 2020 and met the mother of the drug lord El Chapo. Right? They didn't say traveled to meet, like she said in the letter, basically. She said traveled and met. Right? Kind of more very careful language there to try to dance away from an assertion that they know they can't back up. Right?
One point
and
on that, which I think
Yes.
really stresses the fact that they are woefully disconnected from the way that Mexicans think and understand that scene, for example, right? The right wing has loved to bring it up as if it's the smoking gun, that the proof that there's ties, right? Because he went to go say hello to El Chapo's mother. But people in Mexico know that under Felipe Calderón, his security chief, his right-hand man when it comes to his defining policy as president, Genaro Garcia Luna, was guilty of collaborating with organized crime groups. So a notion that they're trying to sell, which may work abroad, but it does not work inside Mexico, that López Obrador and his government represents the ties between politics and organized crime, is an insult when we live through Felipe Calderón's presidency, which was stained with narco-trafficking dollars flowing into the hands of Calderón's security chief. It is an affront to the Mexican population to suggest that now and not before is when there is collusion between the government and organized crime. And only someone who moves in the circles of Roma Condesa instead of where I live, or Iztapalapa, which they love to smear, or Gustavo Amadero, or any of the rural communities in this country that are affected by violence, they would never believe them when they talk about this. They would say, well, actually, organized crime had infiltrated the government, yes, but it wasn't López Obrador, it was Felipe Calderón.
And it's funny that none of this context makes it into any of these pieces. Not the Baker Institute report, not ProPublica, not Deutsche Welle Inside Crime, and not the New York Times report of yesterday. And that literally is it. The rest of the article is all speculation, a rehash of the Cienfuegos case. General Cienfuegos, who was released by the United States, former defense secretary, and an attempt to give some weight to the nothing burger by suggesting there is something there. Really, but the U.S. declined to pursue it for diplomatic considerations, which is the same spin that the ProPublica editor Steve Engelberg tried to put on it after there was a lot of pushback on Tim Golden's piece. He came out with his own and said, well, there really was incriminating evidence, there really was, but, for diplomatic reasons, they decided to let it die. Now, next, and this for me is, talk about journalistic malpractice. In a piece swimming in maybes and we don't know for sures, the allegation about the president's sons is particularly irresponsible, right? She says in the piece, they say in the piece, investigators obtained information from a third source suggesting. I also suggest that the Yankees are going to win, ought to make a trade so they'll win the World Series this year. Probably not. That's not journalism. That drug cartels were in possession of videos of the president's sons picking up drug money, records show. They suggest it. And that's enough to go on? That's enough to go on? As I say in the next tweet, reporters have every right to protect their sources. Nobody's saying they don't. But confidential sources need to lead to something concrete, like the videos themselves, for example. Have Kittereff and Foyer actually seen the videos? Maybe. We don't know. Do the videos exist? Or is it just gossip hour based on carefully timed leaks from U.S. intelligence agencies? And as the president said today in his morning press conference, you can like or dislike AMLO, right? Who is going to clear the reputation of my sons because of that article? Now, every time they do a Google search, the Google search is going to come up. AMLO's sons took money directly from narco, based on a suggestion of a third unnamed source. That's going to stick with them forever, right? Long after Natalie's gone off to some first world country, right, to be the correspondent there. Long after she's written her biography of how she survived Mexico as a correspondent, right, which probably win some kind of award, right? That plucky young lady who survived Mexico from, a rich barrio of Mexico City. Long after Alan Foyer's moved on to other topics, the insinuation about AMLO, these repeated insinuations, and his sons will stick.
Not to mention, it's a page right out of the right-wing playbook, because going after his sons is what they've been doing, including his underage son, is what they've been doing since day one, since he took office, right? Again, these are the circles you're moving with. These are the people that you're associating with, and they are bottom of the barrel, right? Going after people who aren't even directly involved, right? They're acting like López Obrador's sons have posts in the government when they don't, right? They are individual private citizens. The minor in particular, he had to leave Mexico because of the harassment he was enduring at the hands of the press. Just more of the same.
Yeah, I mean, they even went to Houston where his son was renting a house and, outed him there. The current presidential candidate, Xochitl Gálvez, went and outed him there and stood in front of his rented house in Houston. Made a whole scene there, right? The Times piece is simply the latest in a series of election season hits. A few weeks ago, as I mentioned, right, the Baker Institute came out with a report, alleged without proof, that Morena and the cartels could be in cahoots in this year's election. And then it was ProPublica's turn. And that's where the thread ends, right? And it's funny that Stephen Engelberg admits that the DEA read their homework when this is, as we know, a long-standing New York Times tradition of having any piece that relates to national security or foreign affairs, or many of them, passed through the eyes of government officials. Right? We know that there's times when, for example, Tenet or Condoleezza Rice put the kibosh on an article, right? The DEA was all over the ProPublica piece by their own admission, and this just stinks of DEA leaks and whatever else. And, why do they allow themselves to be used in such a grubby fashion? Why? Is it their vendetta against AMLO? Is it their just utter disdain for Mexico? Why set yourself up as tools for American intelligence at the cost of your reputation and at the cost of the reputation of the publications in question?
Why are they doing this? Why is the New York Times joining in on this? One, I think they're Johnny-come-latelys. They felt like somebody else got ahead of this and they wanted to be the ones to do it, and so they had to get their own story. Oh, no, we have something on the 2018 campaign, not the 2006 campaign, which was, many, many years ago. But I think the other thing is there is very much an effort amongst elite circles inside the United States, despite all the platitudes that are expressed by Biden and by López Obrador about the positive relationship, who are very unhappy with López Obrador for reasons that we've explained in other episodes. His government defends national sovereignty. He has strengthened the state oil company, which U.S. capital is desperate to sink its teeth into and try to suck the blood out of this country. He's put limits on the activities of the DEA, right? He's stood up for the expropriation of lithium as a key resources to be hands in the state. This kind of stuff upsets people in elite circles, and they know that it can't be limited just to the right-wing circles, but try to win over that mushy middle, those liberals who want to also benefit from the continued exploitation, the super exploitation of this country. And I saw a response that I think really quite captures exactly the strategy. So Falco Ernst used to be a journalist, used to cover Latin America. Now he works for the Crisis Group. We can get into a little bit of who the Crisis Group is, but it'd be interesting to see into his funding. But he says this in response to this story in the New York Times. In what's becoming a key issue in Mexico's June elections, AMLO is lashing out against the New York Times before publication of a new allegation of collusion with organized crime in his 2018 campaign. AMLO has declared eradicating corruption central to his tenure, and he says he's done so successfully. So a couple of things here. One, Falco spoke before he read the article, clearly responding to the press conference where López Obrador shared that mafia-like letter that he received, that his office received. But I think the takeaway for me is the fact that he says this, a key issue in June's elections. And I, responded to this and I ask, for who? Mexico is becoming polarized, he says in a separate tweet. Really? Because from my view, Claudia Sheinbaum has an overwhelming lead. So I think this is exactly the aim of this narco-financing, DE-Ed-fed stories. They're trying to make it into a key issue. They know it won't be a key issue in this country. I don't think it's actually, like I say here in this tweet, are voters shifting as a result of this campaign? It's been weeks of this, and the poll numbers haven't moved, but it does undermine faith in the vote. It goes back to Xochitl Gálvez's jaunt to the United States and Spain, where she went to go talk about how it's a tilted election, about how the cards are stacked against her, but critically also said organized crime is becoming involved in the election. So now this is becoming the narrative. And people like Falco, who works for the Crisis Group, another NGO tied to, another think tank tied to big money, to capital interest, says that it's a key issue. They're trying to set the stage so that in the future, when they try to undermine the result of the election, they will say, well, we tried to warn you. The only reason Claudia Sheinbaum won wasn't because she's inheriting the popularity of López Obrador, or she represents the political program that most people genuinely support that has been confirmed in poll after poll. No, it's because of organized crime, and therefore we have to weaken her presidency, undermine her mandate, possibly down the road apply sanctions. This is the story of Latin America. This is the story of counter-hegemonic governments. I mentioned at the beginning, I write for Venezuela Analysis. I've been covering this, precisely this kind of slander for 20 years. I know what I'm talking about when it comes to this. This is what they do, so that down the road, they can say, you do not have legitimacy. We're going to punish you by whatever means we have at our disposal in order to undermine your project, lest other people get some ideas about what it's like to actually take the reins of your economy, take the reins of the political structure, and actually try to deliver results for the vast majority of the population.